question.
Sure.
Health tech. As an example of an early stage life science medtech startup with disruptive technology specifically in the area of pain measurement, what has been, in your opinion, of the overall process in bringing such an innovation to fruition?
Well, I think to the point of the gentleman here that we were talking about, truly the definition between technology, disruptive technology, and then I think what you were touching on is what I would categorize as disruptive innovation, right? So innovation creates a new market. What I have found in starting a life science, or life med tech, whatever categorization you want to use for it, as a disruptive technology, is that it's infinitely harder than I ever imagined. And had I really thought about it 2 years ago, I probably wouldn't be here today. It's one of those things where you jump into it and it sounds great and it sounds easy because you identify IP that is exclusive and that no one else has. So in our case, the ability to measure pain. Right now, just everyone, from researchers to doctors, has to ask you what your pain is. So I always use that example. Imagine you had high blood pressure and you went into your clinician and the doctor said, hey, it's great to see you. So what do you feel? You think your blood pressure's high? You feeling all right? We wouldn't accept this, but with pain we do. So it seemed to be a no-brainer to me 2 years ago. I was like off and running. But then what I realized very quickly is that being quote-unquote disruptive is actually a longer, harder road because you face a couple challenges. Number one, you're a pioneer, so you're an innovator in a field. And by nature, that's a lonely place to be, especially when you're by yourself. Because sometimes you and maybe the researcher who invented the technology are the only two people on the planet that know, understand, and believe in it. So you have the challenge of getting acceptance and validation and advocacy, not only from the research world, but also from the industry world. Because the industry world says, well, how will this be used? Who will pay for it? How does it work? So I think in that regard, you need to have a certain level of fanaticism at your core in order to embrace disruptive technologies and really carry the torch of that disruptive technology prior to anyone else seeing it. Because that's what we're seeing too, is things become more complex. Again, I go back to the example of the wheel. The wheel was self-evident, right? People were dragging things and somebody said, hey, woo, and everybody rolled, and it was wow. It wasn't a hard sell. But with more sophistication, it becomes a bit of a hard sell. So you have that degree of pioneering. And the other problem is, in industry and funders themselves, people love to talk about embracing innovation and change, but at the end, they love sustainability. It's the idea of the cash cow and keep milking the cash cow until it's no longer there, and that's when the disruptors come. So I would say that it just demands a lot more than from a startup standpoint. It's more difficult, and I'm sure it's more difficult from an investment standpoint because now you have to figure out, am I full of crap, right? Is this real? Am I saying it's disruptive, or is it really disruptive? So it becomes this tremendously complex cocktail on both sides, both on the research and on the industry.
We were investors because we thought it was too hard to be the entrepreneur. A little easier to be an investor and spread it out, and it's turned out just to be just as difficult, right? Because you have to rally resources around it to change an existing marketplace.
Yeah.
So a question on human capital and scaling. So Uber just poached the entire robotics team out of Carnegie Mellon, which kind of pisses me off because that's my alma mater. But how are you tackling the big problems of scaling? Because when you get to a certain point, finding appropriate human capital is rather difficult, especially in some of these disruptive areas.
I mean, I'll start from that situation. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of disruptions going on, right? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't have the perspective of 30, 40 years ago if an IBM or another group poached a whole group out of the university, right? I know the dynamics of what happens there, which is university research, at least in the US, dollars are flat. People coming into the field are up. It's a tough field to be in right now, right? So now you go to a company, Google's done this, Uber's doing it, and you have, compared to your university research lab, you have unlimited, research budgets to do things in a growing company, and it sounds very, very interesting for a period of time. right? Because all companies, you see this with Google now, right? Google could do anything. They could spend anything. They could invest in anything. And now what did they just do? They hired a CFO to bring down the lashes, right? The dominatrix, to keep them all in line, all those crazy inventors at Google. And you see that in every business over time, right? We used to sell companies to DuPont. We used to sell companies to IBM because they paid a nice return because they could have. DuPont today in the market trades at such a trading price that they can't pay what a Google, what a Facebook, or what an Uber will say. So these are all cyclical transitions that happen. I don't see anything wrong with that process, right? And I think that sometimes those organizations, the leading organizations on any technology trend, can actually, that can be accelerated, and so I like it. From your human capital sort of question, it's a slower process usually, right? So this is, in my book, this is a new phenomenon where you just take a whole research group and you say, we're going to throw money and we're going to accelerate it, right? Microsoft is doing this in quantum computing. $100 million year one, go do it. We can afford to make mistakes or anything like that, but we're driving in that direction. If you're not in those premier areas, then I think it's a much slower process because you have to bring everybody along, and there's an education process to that. So we see that in quantum computing, we see it, right? You first have to differentiate the industry, then you have to bring people along, and then the research community, then the people that were trained in these labs leave the labs and join the company. So it's not Uber's going to try to change something in 3 years. I think it's a 10, 15, 17-year time period for most of these companies. We also see it in sequencing. Right? I mean, we sort of moved from this genomics era. We sequenced DNA. We thought we had a home run. We thought it was going to tell us about disease. But it turns out that the human body is far more difficult than what we thought. And sequencing DNA is not going to give it. Right? There's this whole bunch of phenotypic information, the environment, right? The environment of how it interacts with RNA, metabolomics, proteomics, epigenetics. By the way, how that interacts in the cell, how it interacts in the organ, how it interacts with your environment, both inside and outside of you, and that type of learning coming along. And you have to you literally have to drag research communities and whole areas of study along before it actually can make the market. And I think when we talk about what's so hard about disruption, that is it. Now, I'd love to have 50 more, maybe not Ubers, but 50 more Uber-esque type things, 50 more Googles out there, because I think we would drive innovation. I think we would drive the process of disruption far more quickly, with the capital and applied to a specific problem. My fear is you just took a lot of researchers that are doing very basic research across the universe and you focused them into one problem. And I mean, we saw it in venture capital. The problem with venture capital now is, who do you go to if you want to fund a semiconductor company? I used to work there. There's 60 firms that we used to work with over 30 years. There are now 3 groups that we can go to even look at something like a computing type company, hardware, semiconductor. They don't exist. They all fled to social media. You have a diversity breakdown. Diversity breakdowns in any industry are horrible, right? They're bad in the long run. And that's my fear, right? You take basic research and you funnel it all towards a problem. That problem's going to get solved, but does it really help solve the next 2, 3, 4 problems we need to solve down the road?
I'm not so sure about this. We need more Google, more Uber, etc. to solve problems, because yes, they come up with innovation, disruptive innovation sometimes, because they just throw in resources and money into what they're doing. I totally agree. But maybe I'm naive, but I think the motivation is not right, because they're just money driven. And I hate this whole discussion. It's an investor conference, sorry about that. Just to say, where's the profit, where's the return, where's the money? And whatever is the tool to get to money, that's the way to go. The real big innovations that I've seen in the past come from people who are just passionate about what they're doing, and they love what they do, and they don't give a shit about money. They just say, I want this thing to happen because I love it. And then if it gets a big company, it gets bought, they're happy people, and now they sit on an island or whatever, but that was never the purpose. If you just do business, from my point of view, to get rich, you might end up happy in getting rich, but maybe not lucky as a person. But that's my personal view or take on things. But I don't want to make this a meta-philosophical discussion, but yeah, it's just maybe a difference between my attitude and an investor, but we can sort out later on. we need each other somehow. You know.
It's funny because at our last Disruptive Technologist event that we did with the Bavarian government, we had Rohan Marley, who's the son of Bob Marley, and he made this cool coffee that's organic and good for you and all this stuff. And he said the same thing you just said, Martin. He said you can't go first with profit, you have to go the other way around. But then you'll see another speaker right after this whose book is The Purpose is Profit. So it's hard to say.
But I don't think
There's no wrong or right, you know.
Yeah, but I think, I mean, if you talk to most inventors and most disruptive inventors, there's a passion behind it. And we'll talk about it. You need a passion. So don't, I mean, look, Harris Group, you know, it would have been easy to flee with everybody to social media, right? I mean, it makes a lot more sense economically, but our skill sets and our passion were with sort of the hard sciences and the deep science. And so, and I know a lot of great investors that think that way. So I actually believe, I mean, I'd much rather invest in an entrepreneur that's passionate about it, because the ups and downs are going to come. The interesting thing, I mean, again, just as a not really as a realist, but I was just recently on a panel with the question asked, are the unicorn valuations, the billion-dollar valuations in the private sector going to melt down the market? Right? And of course, you know, you sit there with a group of people and they're too high. I mean, if you sit with New York financiers, valuations are too high, they don't do it. But I actually thought of it from an entrepreneur. I would love to see the next passionate entrepreneur get a billion-dollar valuation out of the gate and raise money, because it's far easier to raise money and it's a low cost of capital to bring something disruptive to market than what I see out there right now, which is, you know, an app gets a billion-dollar valuation, but somebody that's going to actually change the infrastructure of computing, of processing, right, of silicon processing and things like that, the backbone to our society, someone that's going to change the healthcare system, trudge through, I'm going to give you $3 million on $250,000 valuation, and good luck, you know, 30 years raising money in $3 million increments. I think society would be better if we, you know, give them all high valuations. They're not all going to live up to it. But as an investor, it doesn't matter if I invested a $1 billion valuation or a $100 million valuation or a $10 million valuation. If it's really successful and it's really disruptive, I'm either going to lose all my money, and it won't matter the valuation, I'm writing it off entirely, or the gain is going to be big enough that I can do it. So, I mean, it's a sort of a contrarian thought. It doesn't really match finance, but man, it would be wonderful. I mean, it's the same thing. It'd be wonderful if we paid teachers $350,000 a year and paid bankers, you know, $50,000 a year, right? But that's just philosophical.
Well, let's talk about trends. Martin, as you are a business professional currently working on business development at a research institute.
That's right.
Yeah, it's a mouthful. And what disruptive trends do you foresee within the area of business models around future technologies?
I said some things before, so it's around using what is out there, combining it in a new way, building a platform. I think this platform thought is the most important one. You will not fail with technology if you bring something to the market, sell piece by piece. But I think just the combining stuff that's there, creating a new patent on algorithms, how to combine it, and using the intelligence that is out there, and that the service you provide, it's more of a service usually that we talk about than a real product you sell. That the service gets bigger and better and of more value if more people are using it. That's the new disruptive business model. And I struggle to see how this will work in life science, as an example, or with medical, healthcare, etc. How can you apply this new logic in business terms to those areas? I think that's an interesting discussion, but maybe there's an answer to that.
I don't understand.
So you sell a service in your specific case, which is slightly different, but usually you sell a medical instrument or something that doctors use.
Will be a device.
There's no zero marginal costs there that you usually have for these new business models, right?
Well, I think it's a matter of whether it's issues in the mechanism and the methodology of how this all works that you were alluding to, or if you're saying that this new wave of innovation and disruption doesn't work for life science. I would disagree, because I think in anything, whether you're developing a new IT device or whether it's a new medical device, it goes down to the basics of business and identifying an unmet need. And somewhere, somehow, in spite of all the inefficiencies, there are young private individuals doing that. There are large multinational pharma companies that are doing that. So I think as long as there's a need and somebody identifies, I really do think it's that basic across industries. Certainly it's easier in some.
So we spent a lot of time thinking about it. Gary Pisano, who writes a lot on manufacturing at Harvard, actually created a four-square. And I'm not going to remember what all the four squares are, but it's great because it was eye-opening to us, and it fits it, right? So I looked at that, and the first thing I said is, why am I in technology? I just want to be in that new business model area, but not have to take the technology risk, just take the business model risk. It was the upper left-hand corner. Where we end up a lot is in the upper right-hand, which I know it's called architectural. So you have both new technology and a new business plan. Where we end up, which I was saying earlier, where we don't do really well, but you end up you get caught up in the technologies in the lower right-hand quadrant, which is new technology but same business model. And you always believe, DuPont, IBM, 3M, automotive industry is going to buy into this, but it's really hard for the type of the investment to get the technology there, to get it competitive, to get it to a lower cost, to get it where it's easily adoptable. You end up spending a lot more money than you get for it, right? So my famous thing as a venture capitalist, and this is all venture capitalists in the room, what they're really good at, we build really good companies a lot of times. We don't actually make any money. So the best thing I've done at Harris Group over the years is I built a lot of really good companies, right? They're 300 million, they're 500 million, they're billion-dollar market caps, but I lost money in most of them. I can build really good companies, but building companies where you actually make money in the investment, that's really hard, and it's hard in that quadrant. So I'll go up to that upper right, because healthcare, where we're migrating, and we're going 100% in this, so this is sort of where we're putting our money where our mouth is. I think it's a long-term trend. I think it's going to take a long time because you're doing some things, but it'll follow on from the lunch conversation. I think medicine is going to change. I think it's going to change because I don't know why for so long we've given a doctor with a white coat the ability, we walk in there as intelligent people and we take them, I probably listen to him more than I ever listened to my pastor growing up. Right? I take it for good, and he doesn't tell me anything. Right? The only thing he tells me is one day I walk in there, I get a test, I have a disease. He goes, you know what? You got diabetes, you got type 2 diabetes. Oh my gosh, you got prostate cancer. Right? Oh my gosh, you got stage 3 colon cancer. Well, thanks a lot. Why don't you tell me 10 years ago something I could do to prevent that? You have a baby boomer population that for a lot of them watched their parents live with cancers, debilitative diseases for a while. That didn't used to happen. My grandparents, their parents died quickly. You got cancer, went to the hospital, disappeared as a kid. The next week I went, no longer there. Now we live 10, 20 years. We understand it. We've become, we've learned how to self-diagnose. We have information at our fingertips that allows us to actually self-diagnose. The medical community hates it. But we as patients, we're doing it more and more because we want answers. What if I told you go to the doctor today, I can measure your insulin resistance. I can measure it with one biochemical in your body, your insulin resistance, and I can tell you every month, every 6 months as you come in, where you're going on the insulin resistance curve, and I can basically predict from that where your pancreas is going to stop producing insulin, it's going to crash, and you're going to become a type 2 diabetic within 6 months. That information is out there. Your doctor doesn't know. They've never been educated in, insulin resistance and those biochemicals to move you through that cycle. So they wait for a test that they know really well that's been tried and true in the market forever. That's going to change. The patient is going to take control of their health care and drive that. The other thing is we now have the information at our fingertips. We have DNA. We have sequencing information. We have metabolomic information. We have these different omic technologies. And we have the data to be able to process that. And I think the trend is you're going to go, you got to get the customer involved. You're going to go data aggregation. Pharma's going to get involved because pharma's never had access to this. I can get you a cohort of 500 Parkinson's patients, and now you can study those patients. Pharma can't do that. So they're going to find value in it. You're going to go to precision medicine because it's going to answer questions, and we're finally going to get to wellness. And we're going to see that happen over the next 30 years, and that's going to disrupt the medical business model. And along the way, there's going to be a lot of disruptive technologies that come into it. And I think that's a foregone conclusion of what you're going to do, but it's different. I mean, we've tried to do diagnostic companies. It's hard. We just fight against. In the U.S., we fight against, a changing healthcare system, right? But by the way, is going to drive people, it's going to drive high net worth people out of the healthcare system. We're all going to concierge medicine, right? Because it's going to go from 3% to 30% as it has gone in Europe under socialized medicine. So you're going to see that trend. But we're going to demand that wellness, and we're going to drive that medical profession that way. And people are going to want the information long before the FDA gets around to, giving permission for it. And then the reimbursement agencies take another 3 years to see if they really want to reimburse it. So I think that changes
This
happening.
man has passion, good Lord.
Yeah, no.
I just want to add one thing to that, or
Yeah,
do you want to go
sure.
first? It's a really good point. We had some really interesting technologies at Fraunhofer where I struggled to kind of monetize them because they were all hardware-based and nobody really got the business model. As you say, old business model, new business model, new technology. It's a really good characterization. As an example, you mentioned prostate cancer. Some smart guys came up with a new algorithm, a cheap technology that can tell you in 2 minutes with a 99% likability if you have prostate cancer or not, in 2 minutes. Whereas in the normal world, you wait for 2 weeks and you sit at home scared to death. In 2 minutes, 99% not bad. No investor so far is found for that project. I asked those guys, can you do this for other forms of cancer? Yes, we can do it for all kinds of cancer. We just need to start somewhere. We need money for the first iteration and then go from there. This could be a game-changing, life-changing technology. So far, I struggle to find the right people to talk to. Maybe there's someone in the room that's up for grabs. But it doesn't fit the standard modus operandi of investors because, that's hardware, medical services, all of these liability issues. Nobody wants to touch that. If I sell an algorithm, software, no costs, but nice business model, good idea, scalability, hockey stick curve, everyone says, yeah, great, where can I buy?
Right.
It's kind of frustrating what happened in the world, that good technologies or good ideas never get a chance because it's just not clear how they monetize. This is why I'm not angry, don't get me wrong, but kind of puzzled how this
saying
will
the
work
same
out.
thing earlier.
Yeah, no. It's dysfunctional, by its nature. And maybe the hope is that some hybrid of crowdfunding or population funding or whatever they want to call it, and they struggle with the regulations. There's been the change now in the U.S. The European model is there. But maybe that's where that comes from that early innovation, to have a group like this just say to whomever, hey, give us the capital to get to that next phase, and then go from there. So that's my hope anyway.
Wow, turns out I only have 1 minute left. We haven't
Real?
even gotten that far at all.
That's fast.
Does anyone
talk
want to
too
have a question or add
good.
to anything?
Hi, I wanted to get your opinion on what you thought the contests and prizes for solving problems, scientific problems, were, and like the Google X Prize, and and how has that affected innovation, and is that something that's we're going to see more of?
I think it's here and it's here to stay, and we see it across all types of industries. And you look at Virgin Galactic and look at, it's interesting. With technology, that you can't just throw out pure research, NIH grants, public sector. You can't just let it be into the open market, to your point about they're running off in certain areas. It has to be this hybridization, this blend. And I don't know where the answer lies in doing that, but I think these X Prizes sometimes blend that, because you take it, sometimes a basic technology like rocketry or space planes that NASA and the European Space Agency have been working on for the last 50 plus years, but now you accelerate it, so to speak, by putting it in the hands of private equity, venture capitalists, to get to a specific point. And I, for one, think it's here to stay, and I think it's very good. I think it's a very good, simple, efficient driver, and it mixes both of those components.
Yeah, I agree, it's here to stay. So I sit on the National Nanotechnology Triennial Review. Right? So a lot of money in the U.S. went into nanotechnology. They're looking for what came out of it. It's going all to grand challenges, right? And so one of the things I think are great about the grand challenges is no one understands what's happening in nanotechnology. You put a grand challenge and you put a specific endpoint that you need to meet, and and there's a vision for it. We're going to land a man on the moon. That was probably the best one ever created, right? By the way, an unbelievable amount of more resources than anything I've ever seen out there in an X Prize or a Grand Challenge. But it rallies people together. People can get it. People even from the non-technical community can get it. So I think it's a one good way to do research. Again, we need basic research, which I don't see as a grand challenge, but it's one really good way to do it. The other thing we see is the smartest people from American universities sign up for those. So when we go in and look at university labs, they're going for X Prizes. So it motivates them as well. So I think two great reasons to keep them up.
I think this is really great. I just have one more question I wanted to get through before we end, and it's about challenges. The biggest challenges as a nascent disruptive technology faces in development and commercialization, and does being a disruptor make it easier or harder? And that we'll just wrap up with that, Frank.
Oh, again, we alluded to this earlier. It's certainly a harder path to be a disruptor because, again, you have the normal challenges of any startup, and that's the funding, the defining your market, the minimum viable prototyping. But being a disruptor, oftentimes, for instance, in my regard, there's only so many people in the world who even understand the technology that it's difficult to get them to understand it because they have a reticence as well behind it. So that is a part of being a true disruptor, at least in life science that I find, or any technology. I mean, even for aerospace, there was the sound barrier that said, that man cannot go beyond the sound barrier, right? It was this impenetrable wall, and it took a crazy guy like Chuck Yeager to say no, But I definitely think it is harder. But I think it's worth it. I think hopefully the system, because this is a systematic approach, systems tend to self-regulate, and they go, and so we will see ebbs and flows where it's inefficient and then more efficiencies come in. And if universities lose good postdocs and researchers, there will be young students to fill that out. And so I think it'll be a balance, but it's certainly hard. It's not. You think to the lay person out there, they say, "Oh, disruptive. That's your grand ticket." It's anything but.
Everybody claims to be disruptive, but in fact, you don't know until it's a mass phenomena and a billion market. Then it was disruptive. But it's people tend to invest in stuff which is a clear innovation and an improvement. Let's call it that. But if it's really disruptive, it's sometimes so disturbing and so different from what is out there that people just don't get it. And so it's really hard to get money raised for stuff like that. And that's why I said before, the passion is so important. You just stand this through if you really know you want to do this because you think it's important and you have the passion to do it. If you're just money-driven, just innovate and improve on stuff and get a little cash out here and there. That's way easier than being really disruptive.
One thing to add to that, truly, when investors always ask this, right, why you? And so it's always the technology. You got great technology team. Everybody says, "Oh, we got a great team," and you have to have a team of, almost zealot believers in this. But it's that passion that drives you. But it's the execution, and that's another component where many technologies fall down because you could have a wonderful researcher, but if they don't understand how to execute and implement, that's where technologies, and that's who really comes to the surface. Look at social media. Facebook was probably fourth to enter that. Friendster and MySpace.
Google was the 30th search engine.
So it isn't so much about the passion that gets you to a point. But I always answer that question when they say, "Why me?" I say, because I can execute. That's the one thing I know I can do.
Good.
So.
Thank you, gentlemen. You did a great job.
Thank you.
If anyone wants to talk to us afterwards, after the meeting, we're available.